Clara Ashby walked a mile of gravel to ask for the smallest thing a woman can ask. She was 6 years a widow. Her one good dress was grey, and she had brushed it twice that morning. She did not go to the great front door of the house. She knew her place. She went round to the side, the way the coal men went, and she stood there and practised her sentence one last time. She had made it small on purpose. She had made it ask for almost nothing at all. Inside, a duke sat behind a desk buried in lists. 40 rooms were failing around him. A child lay feverish upstairs. The cook had given her notice. The keys of the whole household lay on the blotter where no one would pick them up. And this widow, shone in with her hands folded, looked at all of it and said the only thing she had left to say. "Is there work, Your Grace, for one pair of hands?" He did not answer her. He asked her 3 questions instead, and within the hour he did a thing the whole servants' hall would call madness for a week. If you believe love is built with 2 pairs of hands, this story is for you. Before we begin, if stories like this one warm something in you, subscribe and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. Now, let's go back to the drive, and the grey dress, and the mile of gravel. It was autumn in Kent, in the year 1868. The village was called Netherfold, and Clara Ashby had lived just outside it all her married life. Her husband had been a bailiff. He ran another man's farm, and he ran it well, and he died of a chill he caught walking home in October rain to check that the ditches were clear. That was 6 years gone now. 6 winters. Clara had kept the farm's accounts through every one of the good years, sat up by tallow light with the ledger while he slept, and she had never once been thanked for it, because no one knew. A bailiff's wife did not keep the books. A bailiff's wife kept the house. So she did both, and said nothing, and the numbers were always right. When he died, the farm went back to its owner. There was no widow's portion for a bailiff's widow. There was a cottage she could stay in if she kept it tidy and troubled no one, and there was the memory of work well done that put no bread on any table. So Clara had gone looking for a post. And here is the thing you must understand about her, because everything else grows out of it. 3 houses had turned her away, not because she couldn't do the work, because of how she answered one question. Each time, the mistress or the steward had asked her, "And what post is it you seek?" And each time, being an honest woman, she had told them the truth. She could keep accounts. She could run a still room. She could order a laundry and settle a kitchen and read a tradesman's bill closer than the tradesman liked. She had told them what she could do. And each time she was called presuming. A woman of her station was not meant to say she could keep the books. A woman of her station was meant to ask for a place, humbly, and wait to be told what she was. So Clara learned. She learned it the way you learn to favour a bad knee, slowly, without deciding to, until the limp is just how you walk. She learned to ask for less than she was. She learned to make her sentence small. She thought it was safety. She had no idea, that autumn, that it was anything else. Now, Denholm Court. The great house of the Vane family sat 2 miles the other side of Netherfold, at the end of that mile of gravel, and it had been dying quietly for 3 months. The Duke of Alderdine had lost his wife 2 years before. Some grief a man carries, and still governs. This one had hollowed him out and left him at a desk. His name was Nathaniel Vane, and he was not a foolish man, but he had made one mistake so completely that he could no longer see it. He had begun to believe that if he wrote a problem down, he had dealt with it. The trouble had truly started in the summer. The housekeeper, a Mrs. Pruitt, had left. She had left, everyone said, in a quarrel, sharp words, a slammed door, a woman of 30 years' service walking out down the drive with her back straight. 2 maids had gone after her within the month, the way sheep go through a gap once one has found it. And now Mrs. Dover the cook had given her notice too, on a wet Tuesday. Folding her arms in the kitchen and saying the house had gone to ruin, and she'd not stay to watch it. Upstairs in the nursery, a small girl lay sick. Lady Beatrice was 6 years old. She had a fever that came up in the afternoons and would not settle, and there was no one steady left in the house to nurse her properly, only frightened girls carrying cold broth up cold stairs. And in the bookroom, the Duke made lists. You should have seen that desk. Paper on paper. Every fault of the house set down in a neat hand: the scullery drain, the damp in the west passage, the chimney that smoked, the wine that was going. And there was one line on one of those pages that no one thought much about, a line a man had written down and moved past, that the last quarter's bills from the village had run higher than anyone could account for, higher than seemed right. But Mrs. Pruitt, he had written, always had a reason. He had underlined it once and turned the page. Remember that line. He had written it down. He had not seen it. That was the house Clara Ashby walked up to on a grey morning in October, with her sentence practised and her hands folded and one good dress brushed twice. She was shown in by a girl who didn't know what to do with her, down a passage that smelled of cold ash to the door of the bookroom. And there was the Duke, coat undone at the throat, 2 days without a proper shave, surrounded by his paper. He looked up at the widow in grey, and he was too tired to be anything but plain with her. "You've come about a place," he said. "There is no housekeeper here. I will not pretend otherwise. The last one left, and the ones who might have followed her out the door. I have a sick child, and a cook who leaves at the quarter, and a house I cannot hold." He rubbed his eyes. "So, you've come about a place. What place do you think there is?" And Clara opened her mouth to give her small sentence, the safe one, the one that asked for nothing. "Is there work, Your Grace?" she said, "for one pair of hands?" There it was, the whole of her folded down into 8 words that presumed on nothing. Not I can run your house, not I have kept accounts 20 years, one pair of hands, a thing you could not be scolded for wanting. The Duke looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something none of the 3 other houses had done. He did not tell her what she was. He asked her. "A house of 40 rooms, he said slowly. "In a quarter. What does it spend on candles?" It was a test, and she knew it, and she felt the old cold caution come up in her, say little, say humble, don't be caught knowing too much. She looked at the tired man behind the paper, and for reasons she could not have named, she answered him true. "That depends who is buying them, Your Grace." Her voice was even. "Wax for the family rooms, tallow below stairs. A house this size, run honest, spends perhaps £12 the quarter on both together, more in winter when the dark comes early. If it is spending a great deal more than that, then either you are lighting rooms no one sits in, or someone is buying candles that never reach the house." The Duke did not move. Something behind his eyes had gone very still. "That is a particular answer," he said. "You asked a particular question." "The second," he said. "The laundry. How many hands does it want, done properly, for a house this size?" 3. And a girl to fetch and mangle, so 4 in all, and they must be paid on the day or you'll lose them to the mill. Not 2 women work to the bone who let the fine linen grey because they've no time to boil it right. Grey linen in a great house is not poverty, Your Grace. It is bad management. It costs the same soap either way." He nodded, slowly, and then he asked the last one, and he asked it lower, because it was the one that mattered and he knew it. "If you had the running of this house tomorrow morning," he said, "what would you do first?" And here the caution went out of her entirely, because this was not about her at all. "The sick room, Your Grace," she said at once. "And the water. Nothing else keeps in a fever. Clean linen changed twice a day and boiled, not rinsed. Water boiled and let cool and given often. Not broth left to go cold on a stair. the window open an hour at noon and shut before the damp. A child's fever is won or lost in the small things, and the small things are exactly what a frightened house forgets. The drains and the chimneys can wait a week. The child cannot wait an hour. The room was quiet. Somewhere down a passage a door banged in a draught. The Duke of Alderdine set down his pen. He looked at the mountain of paper he had built for 2 years, every fault of the house recorded, dated, underlined, and not one of them mended. Then he looked at the widow in the grey dress who had just told him, in 3 plain answers, what to do. "I have made lists for 2 years," he said. His voice was rough. "I have written down every wrong thing in this house. I know them all by name." He paused. "You are the first person who has asked me what comes first." He reached across the desk. There, on the blotter where they had lain since Mrs. Pruitt walked out, because no maid dared and no man knew how, was the ring of household keys. Iron and brass, the weight of the whole house on one loop. He picked it up, and he did not offer it to her carefully, or on trial, or with conditions. He stood, and he came round the desk, and he put the ring of keys into Clara Ashby's hand and closed her fingers over it. "The sick room," he said, "and the water." Begin, it was not yet an hour since she had come up the drive. That is the thing the servants' hall would call madness. And you must understand, from where they stood, it was. A bailiff's widow, a stranger off the road in a brushed grey dress, handed the keys to a ducal house over the heads of women who had served in it 30 years on the strength of a 10-minute talk behind a shut door. Of course they called it madness. From the outside, that is exactly what it looked like. They had not heard the 3 questions. They had not heard the 3 answers. The disproportion only makes sense if you were in the room, and they were not in the room. Clara walked into the servants' hall that same afternoon with the keys at her waist. She had not wanted to wear them so soon. But there is no way to hold the keys of a house in secret. They speak. They chime at the hip when you walk. Every woman in that kitchen knew the sound of that particular ring, and every woman turned to look at the widow who had it, and the room went cold in a way the range could not warm. Mrs. Dover the cook was a broad woman with flour to the elbow and 30 years of certainty in her jaw. She looked Clara up and down, slow, from the mended him to the folded hands, and she did not trouble to hide a single thought that crossed her face. Contempt, plain as a printed word. The keys. Those keys. On this. The maids had drawn together by the scullery door, whispering behind their hands, 3 of them, young. One kept looking at the ring, and then at the others as if to ask, "Are you seeing this too?" Clara stood very straight. She had known it would be like this. She had told herself on the drive that it would be like this, and telling yourself is not the same as standing in it. "Good afternoon," she said. "His Grace has asked me to take up the running of the house. I'll want to know each of you by name, and I'll not ask any of you to do a thing I'll not do myself. We begin with the nursery." Nobody moved. Mrs. Dover wiped her hands on her apron, unhurried, and came close enough that only the front of the room could hear her. Her voice was low and almost kind, which was worse. "A bailiff's widow," she said, "with the mistress's keys." "Well, I've seen fine notions come up that drive before, dear, and I've seen them go back down it." She smiled without any warmth in it at all. "You'll not last to Michaelmas." And there it was. Michaelmas, the autumn quarter day when a great house settles its accounts, pays its people, and squares its books with the world. It was set for the end of that very month. Weeks away. Mrs. Dover had not chosen the word by accident. In her mouth it meant, "You will be gone before the reckoning." Neither of them knew yet how right the word would turn out to be, nor for whom. Clara held the woman's eyes. "We'll see," she said quietly. And then, because a fever does not wait for a quarrel to finish, the nursery. Now, she went up. "I want you to see the sick room the way Clara saw it, because it is the first thing in this whole story that goes right, and it goes right because of the smallest things. The nursery was too warm and shut too tight. The fire had been built up as if heat alone were medicine. A tray sat by the bed with broth on it that had grown a skin. The linen on the child had been on the child for 2 days. And in the middle of it, small and flushed and too quiet, lay Lady Beatrice, 6 years old, with her fair hair stuck dark to her forehead and her eyes half open. Watching the ceiling. Clara did not fuss. That is the mark of a person who knows what they are about. They do not fuss. She opened the window a hand's breadth and let the cold noon air cut the sickness in the room. She had the fire dropped to a steady low glow. She sent a girl for water, told her to boil it hard on the range and bring it up to cool. And she sent another for clean sheets and a third for a basin, and while she waited she sat on the edge of the bed and took the child's hot small hand in her 2 cool ones and did not say anything clever. She just held it. "There," she said. "There now." They changed the linen with the child still in the bed, the old way, rolling her gentle from one side to the other so she never had to be lifted. Cool water on a cloth at the wrists and the back of the neck. A little boiled water, cooled, given from a spoon, often a spoon at a time. The window shut before the damp came up at dusk. The whole of it done twice through the evening and twice again in the night, Clara herself sitting up in the chair by the low fire while the house slept and the girls slept in turns. Because she would not ask of them the one thing she would not do. By the grey of the second morning, the fever broke. The child woke clear-eyed and cross and hungry, which is the most beautiful thing a sick child can be, and asked in a small voice for bread and butter and for the window to be open properly. Clara opened the window properly. She cut the bread thin, and she stood there, tired to her bones, and watched Lady Beatrice eat, and knew that this small clean-eyed morning was the first thing that had gone right in Denholm Court in 2 years. The Duke came up when they told him. He stood in the doorway and looked at his daughter sitting up with butter on her chin, and he did not trust it. You could see he did not dare. And then the child said Papa crossly, and asked why he looked so odd, and something in his face came undone. He did not say much to Clara. He was not a man who had words ready any more. He looked at her, standing by the window with the light behind her, and he said only, "Thank you." But it was not the way you thank a servant. It was the way you thank someone who has reached into deep water and pulled up the thing you had already grieved. That was the first degree. Neither of them named it. But something had turned. The kitchen was next, and the kitchen was war. Clara had said she would not ask to see the books yet, but a house cannot be run on trust alone, and the meat bill was the first thing that did not sit right. Mrs. Dover ordered the meat, and the meat came dear, far dearer than the eating in a shrunk household of a sick child and a handful of staff could account for. Clara did the sum in her head the first evening, standing over the range, and the sum did not work. Too much meat, too much money, for too few mouths. So she asked, plainly, the way she would have asked on the farm. "Mrs. Dover, the butcher's book, if you please. The tradesman's account. I'd like to see what we're billed against what comes in." And Mrs. Dover could not produce it. Watch this closely, because this is where the floor first tilts. The cook did not refuse out of pride. She could not find the book. She blustered, and she banged a pot, and she said the accounts were kept elsewhere. They'd always been kept elsewhere. Mrs. Pruitt had kept all of that. It was not a cook's place, and Clara stood very still in the middle of it and understood something cold. The account books were gone. Not mislaid. Gone, the tradesman's ledgers, the record of every bill the house had paid for years. They were not in the house at all, and a person does not carry off a house's account books in a temper on their way out the door. You forget your good gloves in a temper. You do not, by accident, remove the one set of papers that would show exactly what had been bought, and for how much, and where the difference went. Someone had taken them on purpose. Clara did not say any of this out loud in that kitchen. She simply said, "I see. Then we'll keep a new book from today, and I'll order the meat myself until we're straight." And she watched Mrs. Dover's face, and Mrs. Dover's face, just for a moment, was not contemptuous any more. Just for a moment, it was careful. And careful, on a person who has been contemptuous, is a kind of confession. The laundry she settled the way she had said she would at the desk. 3 women and a girl, 4 hands in all, hired proper from the village and paid on the day, and within a week the fine linen came off the line white again, boiled the way it should be, folded warm. The Duke noticed. Of course he noticed. He had written down the grey linen on one of his lists 18 months before and underlined it, and it had stayed grey the whole while. Now it was white, and no one had made a speech about it. It had simply been done. He began around then to use her name. It came out almost by accident, the first time. He was in the bookroom late, as he always was, and she came to ask him a thing about the coal, and he answered, and then said, "Thank you, Mrs. Ashby," and it stopped them both. He had called her nothing before. The woman, the housekeeper. Now, Mrs. Ashby, a small thing, the smallest thing, but you know by now what this story thinks of small things. She started leaving a plate for him. He forgot to eat. She had learned it within the fortnight that he would sit in that bookroom past all reason, and the tray sent up at dinner would go back down untouched, and the man was thinning inside his own coat. So she took to leaving a covered plate on the corner of his desk in the evening, bread and cold meat and whatever was good, covered with a cloth against the draught. She did not say anything about it. She never once said, "Eat, Your Grace." She just left it, covered, and took the empty plate away in the morning, and in this way they had a whole conversation for a week without a single word in it. And he, for his part, he began to leave the lamp burning. She would go up the back stairs to her own room late, after the house was down, and she would see the light still gold under the bookroom door. At first she thought he simply worked too long. Then she understood. He left it burning on purpose. He left it burning so that she passing would know he was still awake, still there, still at the desk, not lost, not drowned, only working. It was the only way he had left to say a thing he could not say. Here I am. I am still here. It was a lamp answering a covered plate, and neither of them ever spoke of either. That was the house then, 3 weeks on. The child was well and running the passages she'd been carried up. The linen was white. The laundry was paid. There was a new book in the kitchen and cold care in the cook's eyes. And the Duke of Alderdine, who for 2 years had known only how to write down what was wrong, had learned to leave a lamp burning for a woman who left him a covered plate. But the account books were still gone. And that was the thing Clara could not let lie. She sat up in her narrow room one night with the keys on the table beside her and the whole shape of it turning over in her mind, and the more she turned it, the less she liked it. That line the Duke had written and shown her once, half ashamed, when she'd asked to understand the house's money, the bills that ran higher than anyone could account for, but Mrs. Pruitt always had a reason. The meat that cost too much. The candles she had priced out loud in the bookroom on her very first morning, £12 the quarter run honest, and this house had been paying far more. The books that a woman had carried off down the drive in a quarrel that everyone believed and no one had questioned. Clara had kept accounts for 20 years, and she knew, the way you know a false note in a familiar tune, that she was not looking at a house that had merely fallen into muddle. Muddle does not remove its own evidence. Muddle does not carry the ledgers off the property. Somebody had been very careful for a very long time, and somebody had walked out the moment there was a risk of a new pair of eyes on the numbers. She sat there in the cold with one candle burning, a tallow candle, one she could account for to the penny, and she looked at the ring of keys, and she felt the old careful habit in her, the one that had kept her small and safe for 6 years, telling her to leave it. A housekeeper keeps the house. She does not go digging into her betters' business. She does not accuse. She does not audit the dead housekeeper's leavings. That was not her place, and she had learned, hadn't she, what happens to a woman who steps past her place. But there was a man downstairs who had been robbed for 2 years while he sat writing lists, and a child upstairs whose house was being bled, and every quiet instinct Clara Ashby had ever trained herself to obey now stood against the one thing she was certain of, that the numbers were lying, and she was the only person under that roof who could read them. McElmus was 2 weeks off. She blew out the candle. But she did not sleep. She lay in the dark of that narrow room, in a house that trusted her now, with the keys cold on the table and the certainty growing in her like a tide, and she made up her mind to do a thing that no servant does, a thing that would put her, a stranger given too much too fast, directly across the path of whoever had emptied those books and slipped away. She would find the numbers they had tried to bury. She just did not yet know where. And down in the village, a grocer named Fenn kept a book of his own. The morning she went down to Netherfold, Clara told no one. She said she was going for thread. That was true as far as it went. She bought the thread first at the draper's and folded it into her basket. Then she stood a moment on the cobbles and looked at the shop with the green door. Fenn's. The bell rang as she went in. It was a small shop, close and warm, smelling of tea and tallow and dried peas. A big man stood behind the counter in an apron gone grey at the seams. He had a pencil behind his ear and a look that missed nothing. He knew who she was. Of course he did. The whole village knew a widow had been handed the keys of Denholm Court within the hour. And the whole village had an opinion. "Mr. Fenn," she said. "Mrs. Ashby," he set down the scoop. "You'll be the new one up at the court." "I am." He waited. He did not fill the silence for her. She liked him for it. "I've come to ask a thing that isn't usual," she said, "and you may say no, and I'll think none the worse of you for it. You keep a book. A tradesman keeps a book of every order and every price and every quarter's reckoning. I should like to see yours. 2 years of it. I should like to copy it out." For a long moment he only looked at her. Outside a cart went by. A dog barked somewhere down the lane. "Now why," said Fenn slowly, "would a housekeeper want to copy a grocer's book?" "Because the house has its own books," said Clara, "and the house's books are gone." She saw it land. She saw the man's jaw tighten. She saw, plain as print, that she was not the first to have a thought about the numbers going up to the court. "Gone," he said. "Carried off, 3 months since." When Mrs. Pruitt left. Fenn wiped his hands on the apron, slow, as though he were deciding something with them. Then he reached under the counter. He brought up a fat book bound in worn leather, the corners gone soft, the spine cracked white. He laid it on the counter between them and put one broad finger on the cover. "I have been paid," he said quietly, "for goods that never left this shop. 2 years, near enough. Ordered in the house's name, signed for. But they never came here for me to hand across. Somebody was buying candles and meat and coal on paper, Mrs. Ashby, and the paper came here. And I was told to hold my tongue and send my account up, and it would be settled. And it was settled. Every quarter. Prompt, which is more than most of the gentry manage." He looked at her hard. "I am an honest man in a small way of business. I took the money because it was owed on the paper before me. But I've not slept easy on it, not for a long while." "Then you'll let me copy it," Clara said. "I'll do better," said Fenn. "I'll copy it out for you myself, in my own hand, so no one can say the housekeeper wrote in what she pleased. And if it comes to a day when a man must stand up and say a thing out loud, in front of his betters, I'll stand up." She had walked a mile of gravel that morning with a cold weight in her chest. It lifted there, in the warm dark of the shop. Not all of it, but enough. "Thank you," she said. That night she began. She sat in her narrow room with the one tallow candle and Fenn's figures on one side and, on the other, everything she could find of the house's own reckoning, the fragments, the loose bills stuffed in a drawer, the scraps Mrs. Pruitt had been too proud or too hurried to burn. She ruled a line down a clean sheet. 2 columns. What the house paid, what the goods were worth, and she began to fill them in. It was slow work. It was the work she knew best in all the world. Her husband had thought her clever with a farm book, and he had been right. But he had never known how clever, because a wife who is cleverer than her account of herself learns to keep it small. She had kept it small for 6 years. Now she let it out, by candlelight, 1 figure at a time. The columns did not match. She had known they would not. Knowing is one thing. Watching it happen under your own pen is another. Candles. A house of 40 rooms burns candles, yes, but not these candles, not twice these candles. Meat, quarter on quarter, for 3 women and a girl and a master who ate like a monk, meat enough to feast a regiment. Coal, linen, each one a little too high, not wildly, never wildly. That was the cunning of it. A thief who takes too much is caught in a season. A thief who takes a little, steadily, patiently, in a house too grieved and too tired to look, that thief can dine for years. She worked past midnight. The candle guttered. She did not stop, and under the bookroom door, 2 floors down, the Duke's lamp burned too. She could not see it from her room. But she knew it was there. He left it burning now every night, past 12, past 1, not because he worked, she had come to understand, but so that she would know he was still awake. It was the only way he had of saying it. A man who had governed a falling house with a written list did not have the words for anything softer. So he left a lamp, and she left a plate, covered, on the corner of his desk, because he forgot to eat when he was thinking. Neither of them had ever said a word about either. That was the language. It had grown between them like moss on stone, quietly, in the cold. She thought about that lamp as she added her columns. She thought, he trusted me with the keys within the hour. And they have all been robbing him for 2 years, and he sat in that room making lists of everything that was wrong, and the one thing most wrong of all he could not see, because it was written in a hand he could not read. She could read it. The gap grew as the nights went on. Autumn deepened. Michaelmas came close. She carried the 2 columns further back, further in, and the difference between them stopped being a suspicion and became a sum. £238. 14 shillings. She sat and looked at the number a long while. £238 and 14 shillings bled out of that house across 2 years, a candle and a chop and 100 weight of coal at a time, while a widowed man grieved and a child lay feverish, and a housekeeper of 30 years' standing wore the ring of keys and smiled, and always, always had a reason. That was why she left, Clara understood. Not in a quarrel. That was the story they told. She left because a house cannot be robbed forever without a reckoning, and she had felt the reckoning coming, and she got out before it arrived, and she took the books with her so no one could ever set the 2 columns side by side. She was clever. She was very clever. She had made only one mistake. She had believed a bailiff's widow could not read a ledger. It was somewhere in those small hours, with the number cooling on the page in front of her, that Clara understood the other thing. The thing about herself. She had gone to 3 houses before Denholm. 3 houses had turned her away, and each time, when they asked her what post she sought, she had told them the truth, that she could keep a house, keep its books, keep its people, and each time she had watched the door close, because a woman of her station was not to name what she could do. It was called presuming. So she had learned to ask for less. She had trained her mouth to a smaller shape. Is there work for one pair of hands? It had felt like humility. She had told herself it was humility. It was not humility. She saw that now, plain as the sum in front of her. It was armor. It was the thing a competent woman says when saying the true thing gets her thrown into the road. One pair of hands asks for nothing, so it can be refused nothing. It was the smallest door she could find, because she had been shut out of every large one. And the Duke of Alderdine had asked her 3 questions, and when she answered them with numbers, he had not called her presuming. He had put the keys in her hand. He was the first man in 6 years to answer the question underneath the question. She folded the 2 columns together, and she did not sleep, and this time it was not fear that kept her awake. She meant to take it to him carefully, in her own time. Well before the quarter day, when she had checked every figure twice, but the house did not give her her own time. They came back. It was a grey afternoon, 3 days before Michaelmas, when 2 of them appeared at the side door. A man and a hard-faced woman Clara half knew from the servants' talk. Pruitt's people come, they said, for Mrs. Pruitt's box. There was a box that was true enough. A trunk of the old housekeeper's things stood still in the box room. But they did not go to it and take it and go. They lingered. They asked things. The woman drifted along the passage, past the still room, past the kitchen, her eyes going everywhere, and her questions were light as feathers and sharp as pins. Was the new housekeeper settling in? Was she finding everything in order? Such a muddle the poor house had been in. Had she found the books at all? Such a shame about the books. Clara answered her plainly and gave nothing, and watched her go, and knew exactly what she was. A scout, sent to learn whether the new woman had found anything, sent to carry word back. She had. The word went back, and Mrs. Pruitt came herself. She came the very next morning, in a good dark travelling dress, in a hired gig up the mile of gravel, as though she still had every right to the drive. She did not go to the side, she came to the front, and she did not ask for Clara. She asked for the Duke. By the time Clara was sent for, the thing was already in motion, and it was aimed at her. Mrs. Pruitt stood in the great hall, in her good dark dress with her hands folded and her chin level, and she had 30 years of that house in the set of her shoulders. She had served this family through the old Duke and the young one, through a wedding and 2 funerals, and she wore all of it like a breastplate. And she was telling the Duke, in a voice pitched low and grieved and reasonable, that she had come because she could not in conscience stay away. Because she had heard things. Because she was afraid, she said, of what had become of the house since she left it, the house she had given her life to. Your Grace, she said, I do not know this woman. Nobody knows this woman. She walked up your drive out of nowhere, a farm bailiff's widow turned off from other houses, and within the hour, Your Grace, she had the keys of Denholm in her hand. And now I am told the account books are gone. Gone. The books I kept faithful for 30 years. And I ask you only this. Ask yourself, who was here when they went? Ask yourself who profits from there being no record. A stranger with the keys and no books to check her by. Your Grace, I beg you, before you trust her another day, look to your own. She let her eyes fill. She was very good. I did not leave in any quarrel. I left because I could not bear what I saw beginning. And I see now I was right to be afraid. It was beautifully done. Clara stood in the doorway and heard it all, and she understood, cold and clear, exactly how it worked. Society has a reflex. The reflex says the known servant over the stranger. The reflex says the woman of 30 years over the woman of 3 weeks. The reflex says the one who was given too much, too fast, is the one to doubt. Every soul in that hall felt the reflex tug. She could see it on the faces of the maids along the wall. The keys had been a wonder to them, and now the wonder had a shadow on it. The Duke turned. He looked at Clara across the length of the hall. His face gave her nothing, and Clara did the thing she had trained herself over 6 careful years to always do. She did not fight. She did not raise her voice and cry that she was honest, because the honest woman who cries she is honest sounds exactly like the guilty one. She reached to her waist and unhooked the ring of household keys, and the cold weight of them lay across her 2 palms, and she walked forward and held them out to him. "Your Grace," she said, and her voice was quite steady, "I'll not stand in a house that doubts me. Take back the keys. I'll go this hour. I ask only that I go with what is mine. A few papers I have written out in my own time, in my own hand. Copies, that is all. Read them or burn them as you please, but let me go quietly, and there needn't be any more of this." She looked once at Mrs. Pruitt. "I've no wish to shame anyone." The hall went very still. Mrs. Pruitt's mouth moved into something that was nearly a smile. She thought she had won. Clara watched her think it. "Copies," the woman's eyes said. "Copies of what, you foolish creature? There's nothing to copy. The books are safe under my own bed 40 miles from here." But the Duke did not take the keys. He looked at the ring lying across Clara's open hands, and then he looked at the papers, the edge of them showing where she had tucked them at her breast. And Nathaniel Vane, who had confused the recording of a problem with the solving of it for 2 long years, who had made a list of everything wrong in his house and never once seen the biggest thing on it, for once in his grief he asked the right question. "Copies of what, Mrs. Ashby?" "Of the numbers, Your Grace," Clara said. "The true ones." There was a silence you could have cut and served. "Michaelmas," said the Duke very quietly, "is tomorrow. The accounts fall due tomorrow." He straightened, and something came back into him that had not been there in 2 years, the man who was master of that house, under all the tiredness. "Then we will settle them tomorrow. All of them. In this hall. Mrs. Pruitt, you have come a long way to defend your 30 years. You will do me the honour of staying to see them honoured. Mrs. Ashby, you will keep the keys 1 more day, and I will send to the village." Mrs. Pruitt's near smile faltered. "Send to the village, Your Grace?" "For Mr. Fenn," said the Duke, "and his book." Michaelmas came grey and bright, and the great hall of Denholm Court filled. They were all there. That was the thing Clara marked, standing at the side with the 2 columns in her hands. The very people who had watched the keys change hands within the hour, the maids, the footman, the hall boy, Mrs. Dover the cook, with her flower-reddened arms folded and her mouth a hard line. The same witnesses to the wound were the witnesses now. The Duke sat at the head of the long table. Beside him, on the polished wood, lay his written list. Everything wrong with the house, in his own cramped hand, 2 years of it. Mrs. Pruitt stood in her good dark dress. Mrs. Dover beside her, and in from the cold, cap in his hands, apron left behind, stood Mr. Fenn, and under his arm was the fat leather book with the cracked white spine. The Duke said, "Mrs. Ashby, you have something to lay before this house." And Clara laid it before them. She did not make a speech. She had no gift for speeches, and no need of one. She had numbers, and numbers, spoken plain and slow in a quiet room, are the loudest thing there is. She opened Fenn's book to the first quarter of 2 years gone, and beside it she set the house's own bill for that same quarter, and she read them out. What the grocer's book said had truly been supplied. What the house had truly been charged. Candles, she read both figures, the difference hung in the air. Meat, she read both figures. Coal, linen, quarter after quarter, down the 2 years, she walked the whole hall through it, and with every pair of numbers the difference grew, and the hall grew stiller, and the thing that had been hidden in 100 small charges stood up at last in one great sum. Mrs. Pruitt did not stay silent long. She was too proud for that. "This is absurd," she said, and her voice rang out over the table. contemptuous, sure, a bailiff's widow reading ledgers. A farm woman with a sheaf of papers she has written herself, in her own hand, telling a duke his own house was robbed. Your Grace, will you truly stand there and... She has written these figures herself. Any woman may write down whatever she pleases and call it an account. She did not write them, said the Duke. She, Mr. Fenn, said the Duke. The big man stepped forward. He was not a man of the hall. He turned his cap in his hands, and his ears went red, and he did not look at ease under all those eyes. But he set his book down open on the table, and he put his broad finger on the page, and when he spoke, his voice did not shake. "That's my hand, Your Grace," he said, "my book. Every figure in it wrote by me, quarter by quarter, these 2 years and more, the day the order came. I'll swear to it before you, or before the magistrate, or before God. What I sent up to this house, that's the small column. There, what things were truly worth. What this house was billed, and what this house paid. I've no book for that. That's the housekeeper's book. That's the one that's gone missing. But Mrs. Ashby's found the old bills, and the bills say one thing, and my book says another, and the space between the two," he swallowed, "the space between the two, Your Grace, come to £238.14. And it never bought so much as a candle for anyone under this roof. I've had it on my conscience 2 years. I'm glad to be shut of it." He stepped back, and Clara watched Mrs. Pruitt's face do the thing she would remember all her life. The contempt held for one heartbeat more. Then it slipped. Not all at once. Just a small pause came into it, the small, terrible pause of a woman who had built 30 years on one certainty, the certainty that nobody below her could count, and who had just watched a bailiff's widow and a village grocer count. Her mouth opened, nothing came out of it. The breastplate cracked, and there was nothing behind it but the sum. The Duke turned then, unhurried, to the cook. "Mrs. Dover," he said, "you gave your notice 3 weeks ago, the very week Mrs. Ashby asked to see the tradesman's book, and you could not produce it. The meat bill for the last quarter you served, Mrs. Ashby, read it, and Mr. Fenn, the meat you truly sent. Clara read the one. Fenn read the other. The gap between them was Mrs. Dover's own hand in the thing, plain for the whole kitchen she had ruled to hear. Mrs. Dover said nothing at all. She did not bluster, and she did not weep. She looked, once, sideways, at Mrs. Pruitt, one long, bitter look, the look of an accomplice who has just understood she followed the wrong general off a cliff. Then she looked at the floor. Her notice, everyone in that hall now understood, had never been notice. It had been flight. She had meant to be gone before the books were ever opened. She had simply been 3 weeks too slow, because a widow in a grey dress had walked up the drive and started reading. The Duke rose from the head of the table. He did not shout. Clara had thought, perhaps, that he might, and she was glad he did not, because the thing he did instead was better. He reached down and took up his list, the long written list of everything wrong with Denholm Court. 2 years of a grieving man's helplessness set down in ink, because setting it down was all he had known how to do. He held it a moment, and he turned it over, face down, on the table. "I have carried this for 2 years," he said to the whole hall, and his voice was low and even and carried into every corner. "A list of everything wrong in my house. I read it every night. I added to it. I thought that was governing." He laid his hand flat on the back of the page. "I find I no longer need it. The thing most wrong in this house was never on the list, because I could not see it. Someone else saw it." He looked up. "I will send for the magistrate this afternoon. Mrs. Pruitt, you will wait for him. Mr. Fenn has already said he will testify, and I believe every figure in his book." The allies who had come for the box were already edging toward the door. They did not wait for the magistrate. They scattered, the way such people always scatter the moment the sum is read aloud. Mrs. Pruitt did not scatter. She had too much pride to run and nowhere left to run to. She stood in her good dark dress in the hall she had bled for 2 years, and she was at the last exactly as small as the sum she had taken, and no larger. And then the Duke turned to Clara. The whole household watched him do it. The same eyes that had seen the keys go into her hand within the hour. 3 weeks gone, watched now to see if he would take them back. He did not. "You asked me a question," he said, "the day you came up my drive. You asked if there was work for one pair of hands." He almost smiled. It sat strangely and well on his tired face. "There is work for these hands as long as this house stands." Clara looked at him. Then she looked down at the ring of keys at her waist, and back up, and she said, in the dry, quiet voice that was her own and no one else's, "1 pair, Your Grace." A beat. But they can also add. Something went through the hall that was almost, in that grave place, a kind of laughter. And the wound was healed with the same witnesses that had made it, which is the only way a wound in a house is ever truly healed. The magistrate came. The book was true. That is the whole of what need be said of Mrs. Pruitt. Her name went into the Assizes record, and out of every good house in the county, and the £238 and 14 shillings was a debt the law would chase her for the rest of her days. Mrs. Dover's name was struck from the character book, which for a cook is its own quiet death. No great house would take her without a character, and she had spent hers following the wrong woman. Fenn was paid what he was truly owed, at last, and slept easy, and told the story in his shop for years, and was believed. And the house came right. It came right slowly, the way real things do. The accounts closed clean at Christmas, and cleaner at Lady Day, and by the spring they closed clean for the first time in 3 years running, and the man who had governed with a list learned to govern with a housekeeper instead, which is to say, he learned to ask the real question and then to trust the answer. It was spring when he asked the last one. The door of the bookroom stood open to a green afternoon. The child was well, more than well. Lady Beatrice ran the great stair now, up and down, the very stair she had once been too frightened and too feverish to climb, and the sound of her feet was the sound of the house being alive again. The lamp still burned in the bookroom past midnight, but it burned for 2 people at one desk now, over one set of clean columns. The covered plate had become, somewhere along the way, a supper they took together, and neither of them had ever remarked on that either. He was not good with words. He never would be. So he used only one. He looked at her across the desk in the green light, at the woman who had walked up his gravel in her one grey dress, and asked for the smallest thing a woman could ask, and he understood at last that she had been asking for the largest thing all along, and had only learned to make it small so the world would not slam the door. And he asked her the question that was left. Not for a housekeeper. "Stay," he said. Clara did not hand him the keys, and she did not walk away. She stood where she was, in the house that trusted her, and she let the word land, and she felt the 6 careful years fall away behind her like a coat she no longer needed in the warmth. And some days after, without a speech, because neither of them had ever needed one, a second key was added to the ring at her waist. A smaller one. The key to the family rooms. He set it there himself, and did not explain it, and she did not ask, because the language they had built in the cold had never once required explaining, and it did not require it now. A year on, Denholm Court kept 2 clocks by which you could tell the time. There was the bookroom lamp, burning late over the accounts, but 2 heads bent to it now, and the numbers under them told the truth. And there was the child on the stair, running down the very steps she had feared, calling out that supper was laid, that they were to come, both of them, that it was getting cold. That is what a house is, in the end. It is not the 40 rooms. It is not the mile of gravel or the name over the door. Here is a house governed by a grieving man with a written list of everything wrong, and nothing on the list ever getting better, because a list only names the trouble and never once lifts it. and here, beside it, is the same house governed by a widow with the keys, who did not make a list, but read the one that was already there, in the numbers, in the hand nobody else could read, and set it right. She asked for the smallest thing she could find to ask for. He was the first man in 6 years to ask her, instead, what she could actually do. That was the whole of it. That was the marriage of it, long before there was any marriage. 2 pairs of hands, and one of them could also add. If this story reached you tonight, comment the town you're watching from. I should dearly like to see how far Clara's story travels.